We've been looking at 3 objections that Sam Harris has brought to the Bible in the course of his debates with Jordan Peterson. We've thought about what about Old Testament wars, we've thought about the issue of sacrifice, and now, what about slavery? Here's how Sam Harris raised the issue.
Slavery is condoned in the Bible, in both Testaments, and in the Quran. There's no getting away from that. Now you can say, well, it's not the central thrust of any of these books, but if you go to the books and try to figure out what the creator of the universe wants with respect to the owning and needless immiseration of other people, right? He expects you to keep slaves, and he's told you how to do it.
Now, straight away, it's not a particularly rational argument from Sam Harris because he's not careful in his assessment of the evidence. Firstly, we must differentiate between the bondservants of the Old Testament, the Greco-Roman practice of slavery where slaves could own property and purchase their freedom, and the transatlantic slave trade, an unequaled race-based horror of the 17th to 19th centuries. That was something quite different to anything in the New Testament or the Old. For a start, the transatlantic slave trade would have been, and should have been, unthinkable based on both Old and New Testaments. Both Testaments outlaw man-stealing, right? You cannot kidnap people and sell them as slaves. It was a capital offense in the Old Testament. Well then, what is this Old Testament slavery that Sam Harris speaks of? It cannot be like the chattel slavery of the transatlantic slave trade. Well, it's a real question in the Old Testament whether the word for slave should be translated as slave. Perhaps bondservant might be a better word for this time-limited service where if you were in debt, you could sell yourself to a master for a time. You might want to take issue with that. It's an age-old philosophical question. Can you sell yourself into slavery? But in the Old Testament, it is not West Africans that are being stolen from their homes en masse and shipped as chattels to a plantation in Georgia. That would have been as unconscionable to an Old Testament believer as it is to you and me. In the New Testament, the Greco-Roman practice was again very different to the transatlantic slave trade. And in that context, Paul, writing the New Testament, did what I reckon Sam Harris would do if he found himself in a culture that practiced Greco-Roman style slavery. See, Paul insisted that everyone was equal. He forbade masters to mistreat their slaves. He told slaves to get their freedom wherever they could. And more than this, he went further than Sam Harris could have gone. Paul taught that God himself had stooped down to the level of a slave so that all of us could be liberated at the deepest level. Paul inverted the hierarchy that the Greco-Roman world took for granted. The great one became the lowest so that the lowest might be raised up. That was the depth charge that Paul dropped, as historian Tom Holland has called it. The depth charge that was the death of slavery as it worked itself out in the history of the West. You see, in history, that depth charge came to fruition, as both Eric Weinstein and Jordan Peterson note.
But clearly, most of the traditions in which it's written into the Holy Book don't practice slavery, and the people who adhere to these belief systems wouldn't defend slavery. So clearly there is the capacity for an update mechanism.
Well, no, but not really. I mean, they've been forced, they've had it beaten out of them, right? I mean, we fought a civil war in the U.S. to get rid of slavery.
But it was Christians who abolished slavery in England, though.
What was that?
It was Christians who were at the forefront of the movement to abolish slavery in England.
There were Christians on either side of everything. I mean, there's no one else to do the job.
Right, but that's the update mechanism.
It's not true that Christians were on either side of everything. In other parts of the world, there were no Christians anywhere, and slavery continued unopposed. Only in the one place where there have been Christians has slavery ever ended. And that is a stunning achievement. Slavery is a human universal. But there is one instance of it being overturned. One. Christians did it. Evangelical Christians did it. And it wasn't by returning to classical values, okay? The Greeks and the Romans were adamant that slavery was natural. Plato and Aristotle both said that nature teaches you that some are born to rule and some are born to be ruled over. Some people, it's obvious, don't have the capacity to run their lives. Just look at them. It's obvious they need masters to tell them what to do. Some people are born to be, in the words of Plato and Aristotle, they're born to be living tools. Some people are like shovels or pitchforks. You can use them. That's basic Greek thinking when it comes to slavery. The classical world was never going to end slavery. Islam was never going to end slavery. What did the West do that made it able to end slavery? Well, it embraced the story of Jesus. See, if you are anti-slavery, come on home to the only people in the history of the world who have ever ended the practice. Peterson says this.
But
but it was specifically Christians who were using their Christian belief as a justification for eradicating slavery.
The problem was they were actually on the losing side of a theological argument. And it would be much better, I think you would agree, if one of the 10 commandments had been, don't keep slaves. I mean, there's certainly one we could swap out for that one.
Sam Harris says it would be nice if don't keep slaves was one of the 10 commandments. The Bible is much clearer than that. On page 1, we are told that all people, highborn and lowborn, men and women, we are all in the image of God. On page 1, the equality of all peoples is settled. And that's my challenge back to Sam Harris. On the basis of the Bible, I can say that all people are equal and that no people are born to be ruled over or born to be a living tool. But on what basis do you rule out slavery, Sam Harris? On what basis do you champion the utter equality of all people? You see, equality is a precious Western idea, but you don't get it outside the Bible. To the ancient Greeks, our idea of equality seems nuts. Okay, an ancient Greek, you go to an ancient Greek and you'd say, okay, so this person is stronger than that person, but they're both equal. And this person is smarter than that person, but they're both equal. The ancient Greek would say, well, equal in what sense? What do you even mean by the word equal? The Greeks did not think the way that we think. So how can Sam Harris affirm the equal value of people? See, I'm not hopeful, especially given the conversation that he had with Peterson about the glass. Here's how this conversation about the glass unfolded.
Right, so if I tell you, well, this glass, this isn't just an ordinary glass. I know it looks just like that one, but this is the glass that Elton John drank from in his last concert here, right?
Right.
So, what do you want to pay me for it, right?
Right.
It could be that, you're just the biggest Elton John fan ever, and it's worth quite a lot to you. Now it's a kind of evident, it's not value intrinsic to the glass, but it is a...
Where's the value located?
Well, it's a measure in the change this provokes in your experience.
So we value things, but we don't always value them according to their material structure. Sometimes we value things because of their position in a hierarchy of values that involves other persons and their value judgments and how we value their value judgments. So Elton John's glass is worth more than the contents of that glass. Okay, that's good news, because when I look at a human being and I wonder what their worth is, I do not want to limit their worth to the material contents in front of me. See, here's a bag of protoplasm, right? A human being. And I could probably get about $20 for the minerals that are inside that bag of protoplasm. But we know that people are worth more than $20, right? So here's hoping that people can be valued not according to what's inside them. Here's hoping that there is a value system that will accord people dignity that goes beyond their material structure or their particular strength or intelligence. Here's hoping there is an Elton John out there that actually is connected to the human person, whose connection to that person gives that person supreme value. I hope there is an Elton John out there, right? Of course, that's not how the analogy is developed in the debate. In the debate, Harris says that the glass is like the land of Palestine.
So this is the reason why Israel and the Israelis and the Palestinians can't negotiate as though their problems could be solved by a real estate transaction is because they have irrational and irreconcilable claims upon land and buildings.
Do you think they're any more irrational than the claim that glass is worth something more?
Well, no, it's like that.
According to Harris, it's irrational to attribute to objects values that can't be seen in the objects themselves. His example is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict over the land. They need to get over themselves. It's just a strip of land. It's just real estate, right? Well, okay, I'm sympathetic to some degree to that comparison. Okay, compare the glass to that strip of land, that bit of real estate. All right. But look what Harris does with the analogy.
The true analogy here, the complete analogy, is rather like we're about to fight over Elton John's glass, and Elton John was never here. Right?
Well,
and everybody claps. But everybody claps when they think that the glass is Palestine. Would they clap if they knew that the glass was the human person? Because if the glass represents the human person, then Sam Harris has said something absolutely catastrophic to human dignity. If Elton John was never here, if there is no greater person outside to give us dignity, then we really are the sum total of our contents. The glass is just a glass, virtually worthless. And the human person is just a bag of protoplasm, virtually worthless. Sure, some might have strength, some might have intelligence, but at that point, the person with more strength and more intelligence is more valuable than the weak and stupid person, right? And suddenly equality is a fantasy. Get rid of Elton John and the glass must be valued on its own merits. Get rid of God, who makes us in his image, and we must be valued on our own merits. And some are stronger and some are weaker. Some are smarter, some are dumber. Some are born to rule and some surely are born to be ruled over. Harris says he would like a commandment outlawing slavery. The Bible does better than that. On page 1, it puts value on every human person, highborn and lowborn. At its center is the Lord who became a slave to free us all, and in the end there is a vision of all people from all cultures gathered together around one table to feast and to toast our cosmic liberation. What does Harris have? He has a glass and no Elton John. That's not a way forward for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it's the end of human dignity, human rights, and human equality. There's a reason that only Christians have ended slavery, because only Christ can do it. Next time, we will conclude our comparison of Harris and Peterson. In our 5th video, we're going to show that Harris values religion too little and Peterson values religion too much. See you next time.